So today's video is about comparing and ordering fractions and decimals. So what does it mean to compare and order numbers? When you compare numbers, you tell which one is greater. When you order numbers, you are putting them from least to greatest or from greatest to least. So one thing that I want you to remember is that you cannot compare apples to oranges. So when I say that, what I mean is when numbers are in different forms, like fractions or decimals or percents, which you'll learn about in a later unit, it's difficult to compare them to each other. So that would be apples to oranges. So you must change all the numbers to decimals first before you compare them. And that would be comparing apples to apples. It's much easier to compare the numbers when they're all in the same form. So here's my first example. You have 35 cents, Jeremy has 3/10 of a dollar, and Maxine has 33 cents of a dollar. Who has the least amount of money? So I want to compare them, but I can't because Jeremy and Maxine are in dollar and cent form. But I and Maxine are in dollar and cent form, but Jeremy is in fraction form. So before I can compare them, I need to change them all to decimals first. Now, if it's already a decimal, you can leave it that way. So the 35 cent was already a decimal. I can leave that. The 33 cent was already a decimal as well. I can leave that. But the 3/10 wasn't. It was in fraction form. So I need to change it to a decimal. So that means I've got to divide the numerator by the denominator. So I'm trying to divide 10 into 3. 10 can't go into 3, so I have to add a decimal and a 0. I'm going to bring that decimal up and then divide. So 10 can go into 30 3 times. And then I subtract and I get 30. And now I'm at 0. So then that means that 3/10 is equal to 3/10. So now I want to compare them. But in order for me to make the most fair comparison, I need all the numbers to go out to dollars and cents. So this is not 3 cents. This is actually 30 cents. So now I'm comparing 35 cents to 33 cents to 30 cents. Well, since 3/10 is the smallest number, that means that Jeremy has the least amount of money. And do you see how much easier it was to make that comparison once they were all in the same form? So, another example. We want to know which choice shows the numbers in order from least to greatest. So they've given me these 3 different answer choices, and they've given me the same 3 numbers, but in different orders. So before I can go further, I need to change everything to a decimal so that everything since that way, if everything's in decimal form, it's easier to compare. So 2/100 was already in decimal form. I can leave it that way. 2/10 was actually already in decimal form, so I can leave it that way. But what I actually want to do is add a 0 behind the 2 so that they both go out to the 100th place. And then I have 2/100 and then 20/100. And then my last one is that fraction 1/4, and I need to change that to a decimal. I'm going to change it the same way we've been changing decimals to fractions. Fractions to decimals. I'm going to divide the numerator by the denominator. And then once I've divided that, I've changed it to a decimal. So 1/4 is now 25/100. So now I'm comparing 2/100 to 20/100 to 25/100. So I can put them in order. Well, 2/100 is the smallest. So that's my number that needs to go first. And when you're doing that comparison, you got to make sure you put everything back in its original form. Because if you'll notice, the answer choices are in the original form. So I need to be able to recognize it. Well, 200 was already 200 in the problem. Then I have this 20/100, but originally it was 2/10 in the problem. And then I have 25/100, but originally it was 1/4. So this is my order from least to greatest. 2/100, 2/10, 1/4. So I look at my first answer choice, that's not the correct order. I'm looking here, that's not the correct order because they have the 1/4 coming first, and I know it needs to go last. Then I've got my point. Oh, D can't be the answer either because D's got 1/4 coming first. So if I look at C, I see that C matches my answer over here. So that means that C is my correct answer. So C is showing the numbers from least to greatest. So our last example, they want us to tell which statement is true. So they've given us these different inequalities and equal signs, and they want to know which one is actually showing a true statement. Before I can do that, again, remember, apples to oranges. I need to compare apples to apples. Change everything to a decimal before you start comparing and trying to decide if it's true or false. So I've got 26 hundredths greater than 3 tenths. Well, it's hard to compare them that way because this is in fraction form and this is in decimal form. So I'm going to change 3 tenths to a fraction, which gives me 3 tenths, but then I'm going to add that 0 at the end so that they have the same number of digits behind the decimal. So now it's easier to compare. So is 2600 greater than 30 hundredths? No, that's false. 26 hundredths is actually less, so it can't be A. So now it's time to look at B. So I have 6 hundredths, and I want to know if that's greater than 6 tenths. Well, 6 hundredths as a decimal would be 6 hundredths. And then 6 tenths, well, this is going out to the hundredth place, so I want to put that 0 on the end so I can make that better comparison. And so now it's 60 hundredths compared to 6. And they're saying that 6 hundredths is greater than 60 hundredths, but we know that's not true. That's false. So it's not B either. So I'm looking at C. I want to know, is 1 and 25 hundredths equal to 1 and 2/5? They look very similar, but remember, you can't just put this 2 and the 5 in decimal form and say that these are the same. So what I want to do is I want to actually change 2/5 to a decimal. And then that gives me 4 tenths. And then remember, we talked about when you have that mixed number, that whole number is going to stay the same. So then that means 1 and 2/5 would be 1 and 4 tenths. So then the question is 1 and 25 hundredths equal to 1 and 4 tenths? But we know they're not the same. So that's false. Which means that my correct answer has to actually be D. And if I look here, I've got 2/5, which is 4 tenths, and we did that up here. And then I'm going to add that 0 on the end, and I know that 40 hundredths is indeed less than 45 hundredths, which means D is true. D is the answer choice that is true. So that would be my correct answer. So remember, you do not want to compare apples to oranges. When you're asked to compare or you're asked to put them in order from least to greatest, you need to be comparing apples to apples. Change everything to a decimal first. It makes it so much easier to make those comparisons. All right, go ahead and do your Teach to the Tiger. Write about something you learned in the video today.